San Francisco, December 1968. The city was typically known for its winding hills, old cable cars, and the thick fog that rolled in from the Pacific, carrying the scent of salt and hope. But for Alex Chen, a 24-year-old cub reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle these days, the city carried a different smell, the smell of fear. Alex sat at his worn-out desk, the scent of newsprint and ink deeply embedded in every plank of wood. He had just graduated and fought off the editorial board's skepticism to secure a permanent position. His first assignments were to cover petty thefts and trivial events, but his mind was drawn to a mysterious case that was just beginning to appear on the front page.
2 weeks earlier, on a cold December night, a young couple, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were shot and killed on a deserted road on Lake Herman Road near Vallejo. Local police had hypothesized that this was a random killing, an isolated act of violence by hooligans.
But there was something in the news report Alex read that sent a chill down his spine. No signs of robbery, the article read, and the two victims had no previous altercations with anyone. Chapter 1. Twilight on Death Alley, San Francisco, December 1968. The city was typically known for its winding hills, old cable cars, and the thick fog that rolled in from the Pacific, carrying the scent of salt and hope. But for Alex Chen, a 24-year-old cub reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle these days, the city carried a different smell, the smell of fear. Alex sat at his worn-out desk, the scent of newsprint and ink deeply embedded in every plank of wood. He had just graduated and fought off the editorial board's skepticism to secure a permanent position. His first assignments were to cover petty thefts and trivial events, but his mind was drawn to a mysterious case that was just beginning to appear on the front page. 2 weeks earlier, on a cold December night, a young couple, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were shot and killed on a deserted road on Lake Herman Road near Vallejo. Local police had hypothesized that this was a random killing, an isolated act of violence by hooligans. But there was something in the news report Alex read that sent a chill down his spine. No signs of robbery, the article read, and the two victims had no previous altercations with anyone. What are you looking at, Chen? Robert Grayson, Alex's editor, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a tired smile, asked. The case in Vallejo, sir, Alex replied, his eyes not leaving the page. It seems odd. A senseless murder. Tragic for those kids, but it's not our job. Now focus on the city council meeting report. That's what we get paid to do. Alex nodded, but his mind drifted back to that desolate road. He began searching for other news from smaller local papers. He found a short article about a similar case, one that happened 6 months later, on the night of July 4th, 1969. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were shot in a secluded parking lot at Blue Rock Springs, also in Vallejo. Michael Mageau survived, but Darlene Ferrin did not. A similar incident. This time, it was no longer random. What made the case even more terrifying was a phone call made to the Vallejo Police Department right after the attack. A man's voice, calm and composed, took credit for both crimes. Excuse me, sir, Alex said, standing up. I think there's a bigger story happening in Vallejo. 2 cases, same method, same area, and a man called to confess. Grayson looked at him with a mix of suspicion and surprise. The police confirmed it, but they still think it's a crazy copycat, and even if it's true, it's still the Vallejo police's business. But what if he doesn't stop? Alex asked. What if he keeps killing? And what if he wants everyone to know who he is? And then what Alex feared came true. A few days later, major newspapers in San Francisco, including the Chronicle, received identical letters. The letters were written in all caps, with a tone of arrogance. The first letter began with, "This is the killer of Vallejo." The writer threatened to continue killing if the newspapers didn't publish a mysterious cipher he had included. Alex stared at a copy of the letter, his heart pounding. It wasn't just a case. It was a mind game. The killer was challenging them. Grayson handed Alex the letter and a copy of the cipher. "The police want you to report on this," he said. Write a dry, factual article. Don't be a hero. Alex took the letter, flipping to the cipher. It was a long sequence of seemingly meaningless symbols and letters. At the end of the letter, the killer had signed off with a strange symbol, a circle with a cross dividing it into 4 parts. Alex knew this was his chance. He didn't just want to report, he wanted to decipher. He wanted to understand the person behind these words. He wanted to find out why a person would cause such terror. He didn't know that getting involved in Zodiac's game would change his life forever. He only knew that from that moment on, an invisible thread had connected him to this mysterious killer. He began his work, his desk becoming a battlefield of news clippings, diagrams, and scratch papers filled with wild theories. The smell of the Chronicles ink now carried a new meaning. It was the smell of the hunt. Chapter 2. The Zealot's Cipher. The smell of newsprint and stale coffee filled the air, but all Alex could smell was burning paper and an unending thirst. For 3 days, he had lived and slept at his desk, obsessed with the 408 symbol cipher. "It's all gibberish," a detective from the San Francisco Police Department grumbled during a hurried press conference. "He's probably just a lunatic looking for attention. The cipher is unsolvable." But to Alex, it wasn't madness. It was arrogance. This killer didn't just want to instill fear. He wanted to be admired. He wanted to be a puzzle that no one could solve. And that was driving Alex crazy. He inverted the characters, compared them to Morse code, the Greek alphabet, even ancient hieroglyphs. He searched for repeated frequencies, for hidden patterns, but everything seemed to be a random sequence of characters. The entire newsroom had received a copy of the cipher, and all the reporters were trying their luck, but no one was getting closer than Alex. He didn't want to be part of the crowd. He wanted to be the one to win this game. In a moment of desperation, Alex remembered a story he had heard from an old editor about a genius cryptographer who had retired. His name was Elias Thorne, and he had once worked for the government on a secret project. Rumor had it that he had solved an enemy cipher during World War II just by looking at the small flaws in its structure. Afterward, he had left the job abruptly and lived in seclusion. Alex found Elias Thorne's address in an old directory. It was a small house on a hill in the suburbs, surrounded by ancient oak trees. When Alex Gonkua, an old man with wild white hair and a silvery beard, answered, he was surrounded by towering stacks of books, old computers, and the smell of tobacco that had soaked into the furniture. "I have nothing to say to anyone from the media," Elias said, his voice hoarse and weary. "Especially not reckless young people who chase after zealots." "I'm not chasing him," Alex said, clutching the Zodiac letter in his hand. "I'm trying to find him, and I need your help." Alex told Elias about the cases, about the killer's coldness, and the arrogance in his letters. Elias looked at Alex with a probing gaze. Finally, he sighed and took the copy of the cipher. He didn't use a computer or any modern tools. He just used an old magnifying glass and a pencil. He stared at the characters, not to solve them, but to feel them. His eyes scanned the symbols, and Alex saw the focus of a man who had spent his life reading hidden things. After a long silence, Elias put the cipher down and pointed to a character. "This killer isn't just talking to the public," he said, his voice calm. "He's talking to a specific person. He's left a small mistake here, something that only one person could see. He's lying, but not about his identity. He's lying about his motive." A chill ran down Alex's spine. "What are you saying?" "He's not a common lunatic," Elias said, looking straight into Alex's eyes. "He has a reason, a purpose, and he's hiding it, but still wants someone to find it. He's playing a game that no one else knows about yet." Alex looked at the cipher with a new perspective. It wasn't a puzzle to solve an identity, but a statement of motive. And with Elias's help, Alex had taken one step closer to the truth, a truth that even the police had never suspected. Chapter 3. The Brutality of Lake Berryessa. The phone rang just after noon, its shrill cry cutting through the newsroom's usual hum. Alex answered it, still poring over his notes on the Zodiac cipher, a faint hope stirring in his gut. "Chen, get to Lake Berryessa. Fast," Grayson's voice barked through the receiver. "Another one. He used a knife this time. It's a bloodbath." The words hit Alex like a punch to the stomach. A knife? The previous attacks were distant, impersonal shootings. This was an escalation, a twisted step closer to his victims. He grabbed his camera and notepad, the scent of fresh ink replaced by the acrid smell of ozone and fear. Lake Berryessa was a tranquil place, a popular spot for young couples seeking refuge from the city's chaos. But today, the tranquility was a cruel joke. The shoreline was a flurry of police cars, flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the still water. A patrol officer directed Alex to a secluded cove where the scene was being processed. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something else. Iron. Alex found a detective at the edge of the crime scene, his face grim. He wore a black hood with that damn cross-circle symbol on it, the detective explained, his voice flat. And he had a gun, but he didn't use it, just a knife. They were tied up. The boy survived, but the girl, she didn't. The surviving victim, Brian Hartnell, had been brutally stabbed multiple times, but he had survived to tell a horrifying tale. He described the attacker as a man in a bizarre executioner's hood, a performance meant for no one but the victims themselves. Zodiac had become theatrical, a maestro of macabre acts. As Alex walked away from the scene, his mind raced. This was no longer just about a man who wanted attention. This was about power, control, and a deep-seated desire to terrorize. The Zodiac had chosen a location of peace to unleash a new level of brutality, as if to mock the very idea of safety. Back at a payphone, Alex called Elias Thorne. "He used a knife, Elias. He wore a costume. It's a different kind of violence." "Of course it is," Elias replied, his voice calm but firm. "He's telling you something, Alex. He's not just a hunter. He's a showman." The cipher was his first trick, a way to lure you in. This is his second act. He wants you to see the violence up close. He wants you to know that he is not a ghost. He is very, very real. The call ended, and Alex stood there for a long moment, the scent of the lake and the lingering horror of the crime scene swirling around him. The invisible thread that connected him to the killer was no longer just a faint whisper. It was a tight, suffocating rope. He knew then that his path was irrevocably tied to the Zodiac's, and the game had just gotten a lot more dangerous. Chapter 4. A Drop of Blood on the Hair. The terror reached a new level when it came to the city. On the night of October 11, 1969, Paul Stein, a taxi driver, was shot and killed in his car in the wealthy Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. The location itself, just a few blocks from the heart of the city, a place of safety and affluence, was a chilling change of pace. The killer had left his rural hunting grounds and stepped directly into the urban jungle. The crime was witnessed by 3 teenagers from an upstairs window across the street. They saw a man wipe down the taxi's interior, then walk casually away. They called the police immediately, providing a detailed description of the killer, a man in his early 40s with a crew cut and glasses. The police were on the scene within minutes. Alex was one of the first reporters there, his heart sinking as he saw the blood-splattered taxi. A patrolman, visibly shaken, told him that the man the witnesses described was spotted walking away from the scene. "We almost had him," the patrolman said, his voice heavy with regret. But a radio dispatch error gave the wrong description. "We were looking for a black male, not a white male. He just walked right past our units." The detail hit Alex hard. A simple mistake, a clerical error, had let the most dangerous man in California walk free. It was a brutal reminder of how easily the system could fail. But as Alex reported on the failure, he received a call from an anonymous source in the police department, a detective who had grown frustrated with the missteps. "Look at the witness sketch again, Chen," the voice on the phone said. "And look at the last letter. He's not just a killer, he's a showman. He's leaving us little notes. Things only he and a very small circle of people will get. What if he's not a killer, but an actor?" Alex studied the sketch and the letter. He saw the same cold, calculating eyes in both. Then he noticed a detail in the letter that no one had mentioned publicly. A small doodle of a compass pointing to the northeast, right next to the date. The doodle seemed to imply that the killer had no intention of stopping, but was also sending a signal, a personal message. The Zodiac had not only moved his theater to the city, but he had also brought his audience closer. He wasn't just killing for pleasure, but for performance, and he was taking it to the next level. This time, he had left behind a trophy, a piece of Paul Stein's blood-stained shirt. A piece of the puzzle that was getting bigger and more terrifying with every passing day. The game was no longer being played in the dark corners of the countryside. It was now being played in the very heart of Alex's city. Chapter 5. The Bloody Shard. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, a plain envelope with a typewritten address and a San Francisco postmark. It was addressed to the San Francisco Chronicle, and Alex S. Hart froze the moment he saw the familiar cross-circle symbol drawn sloppily at the bottom. The office immediately fell silent, a collective gasp of dread hanging in the air. This was no ordinary letter. When the city editor, a stern man named Mr. Finch, opened it, a small, dark red shard of fabric fell onto his desk. It was no bigger than a quarter, stiff with dried blood. Attached to it was a short, taunting note in the same blocky handwriting as the previous letters. "This is part of a piece of shirt from the Paul Stein murder," it declared. "I will be sending more." The killer was not just confessing. He was sending proof, a gruesome trophy. The fear that had been simmering in San Francisco finally boiled over. Parents pulled their children from school. Residents stayed indoors, locking their doors and looking at every stranger with suspicion. The Zodiac was no longer a phantom from the newspapers. He was real, and he had left a piece of his monstrous work in the heart of the city's media. Alex, however, felt a different kind of terror. As he stared at the bloody shard, his eyes fell upon a small, almost invisible detail on the letter. In the margin, near a seemingly random cluster of letters, was a faint mark, a tiny, almost imperceptible dot. It was not a part of the formal cipher or the text. It was something else entirely. He quickly scanned the previous letters, the ones he had spent hours studying with Elias. And there it was, the same dot, in the same position, always next to the word me or I. It was a personal signature, a mark meant for him alone. Zodiac was not just talking to the newspapers anymore. He was talking to Alex directly. A wave of dread washed over him. Zodiac knew his name. He knew who he was. The killer had been watching him, reading his articles, following his work. The game was no longer a matter of journalistic pursuit. It had become a personal, dangerous correspondence. Alex was no longer an observer. He was a player, and he was terrified of what Zodiac would ask him to do next. The bloody shard was not just a symbol of death, but an invitation, a chilling dare that Alex felt compelled to accept. Chapter 6. Hunting a Ghost. The phone calls stopped. The letters ceased. The gruesome trophies no longer appeared on editors' desks. San Francisco took a collective, shuddering breath of relief. For over a year, Zodiac had been a constant presence, a monster hiding in the shadows. But now he was gone. The killings had stopped. The police, exhausted and defeated, scaled back their investigation, declaring the case cold. The city began to heal, but for Alex Chen, the silence was deafening. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Zodiac was still out there, watching. The personal mark in the letters was a beacon, a signal that the game wasn't over. While everyone else moved on, Alex's obsession deepened. He spent his nights in a dimly lit apartment, surrounded by maps of the Bay Area, news clippings, and copies of every letter the killer had sent. His apartment had become a shrine to the case. Alex knew that if he wanted to find Zodiac, he had to go back to the beginning. He returned to Elias Thorne's house, the old cryptographer's lair of dusty books and forgotten secrets. "He stopped," Alex said, his voice raw with fatigue. "Everyone thinks he's given up." Elias looked at him over the rim of his glasses, a knowing glint in his eyes. "A man like that doesn't just stop, Alex. He reloads. He's testing your commitment. He's watching to see if you will give up, just like the rest of them. Elias helped Alex review the Zodiac's first and most famous cipher, the 408 symbol one that had been partially solved by a schoolteacher and his wife. The police had focused on the message itself, the chilling confession and threat of more violence. But they had never looked for something else, something hidden in plain sight. For weeks, Alex and Elias pored over the cipher, searching for a flaw, a stray character, anything that didn't belong. Then, on a late night, with the scent of coffee and tobacco thick in the air, Alex saw it. It wasn't a symbol or a letter, but a small, almost invisible break in one of the lines. It was a minuscule gap between two symbols that was not present anywhere else. Elias saw it too. He tapped the spot with his finger, his eyes wide. He didn't just write a confession, Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. He wrote a blueprint. This break, it's a map. Alex's hands trembled as he placed a clear overlay of the cipher onto a map of the Bay Area. He had to adjust it, rotate it, but slowly, meticulously, a pattern emerged. The small break in the line wasn't random. It pointed to a specific, desolate stretch of a highway, and a location in the city no one had ever connected to the Zodiac. The ghost had left a trail. The game was back on, and Alex had found the first new clue in over a year. He knew that the Zodiac had been waiting, watching to see who would be brave enough or foolish enough to continue the hunt. That man was Alex Chen, and he was about to get closer than anyone ever had before. Chapter 7. The Final Prophecy. The last letter from the Zodiac arrived a year later, in March 1970. The newspapers had almost forgotten him, but the fear remained, a low, constant hum beneath the surface. This letter was different. It was short, filled with taunts, but it ended with a new and terrifying threat. My next kill will be a bomb. It will be a school bus. The public panicked. Parents kept their children at home, and the police department was flooded with false alarms. The city held its breath, waiting for the worst. But as Alex stared at the letter, he felt a strange calm. Everyone was focused on the literal meaning, but Alex's mind, now attuned to the Zodiac's twisted logic, saw something else. The Zodiac didn't want to kill children indiscriminately. He wanted a specific kind of attention. He wanted to be a martyr in his own mind. The threat was a performance, not a plan. Alex raced to Elias's house, his hands trembling. It's not real, Elias. The threat isn't real. It's a metaphor. Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the letter. The location, Alex. He's telling you where he's going to stage his final act. He's pointing you to a specific place. They laid out the cipher overlay on the map once more. This time they focused on the new, unmarked location that Alex had discovered in the previous chapter. The stretch of highway, the desolate urban area. It was an old industrial district, filled with abandoned warehouses and factories, the ghosts of a forgotten era. It was a place where a man could disappear. Alex spent days digging through old city records, looking for a link between the locations of Zodiac's crimes. He found nothing in the public records, but a tip from his police source led him to a small, private company that had gone out of business in the early 1960s. The company had been a manufacturer of specialized mechanical parts for clocks, watches, and intricate machinery. And then, he found it. The company had a supply chain that directly linked every single Zodiac crime scene. The gun was likely manufactured in the Bay Area, and the knives could have been made in one of the company's factories. The bus-related threat was a reference to an old bus line that ran directly past the company's former headquarters, a route that had been closed years ago. The school bus wasn't a school bus at all. It was a ghost, a forgotten route that only someone with a very specific, deeply personal history with that part of the city would remember. The Zodiac wasn't threatening to kill more people. He was threatening to reveal his own past, a past that was inextricably tied to an old forgotten company and a desolate industrial area. The map, the cipher, the bloody shard, and the final threat. It was all a trail leading to a specific, deeply personal place. The hunt was no longer for a killer, but for a man who had been hiding in plain sight for years, and he was about to make his final move. Chapter 8. The Bay Area Watchmaker. The address led Alex to a forgotten corner of Oakland, a part of the city that seemed frozen in time. The street was lined with dilapidated warehouses and boarded-up storefronts. In the middle of it all stood a small brick building with a faded sign that read, Thorne & Sons Watchmaking. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. Thorne? He immediately thought of Elias, but the cryptographer had never mentioned a family business. The connection was too perfect, too chilling to be a coincidence. He found the door unlocked and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old oil, metal shavings, and a faint sweetness of tobacco. The front of the shop was a cluttered mess of broken clock parts, gears, and rusty tools. In the back, he found a small, dusty workshop. There was a workbench, a collection of half-finished projects, and a single faded photograph on the wall. The photograph showed a younger Elias Thorne standing next to a stern-looking man. The stern man's face seemed hauntingly familiar. It was the man from the police sketch. It was the Zodiac. Alex's mind reeled. Elias's last name was Thorne. The shop was Thorne & Sons Watchmaking. The Zodiac was standing in a photograph with a younger Elias. He was standing in a picture with the Zodiac. Elias had to be a family member, a son or a brother, to the Zodiac. Elias knew him and had likely known his motives all along. Alex frantically searched the workshop, his hands trembling. He found a small leather-bound journal tucked away in a drawer. The handwriting was neat, precise, and identical to the blocky letters in the Zodiac's letters. This was not a diary of a killer, but a logbook of a disturbed man, a record of his frustrations with the world and his need for control. The entries were filled with philosophical musings, rage-filled rants about the injustices of a world that didn't appreciate his genius, and notes on the construction of intricate machines. As he flipped through the pages, Alex found a detailed drawing of a device, a clockwork mechanism designed to look like a small, harmless toy. And then, he found a final, shocking entry. The journal entry described a masterpiece, a final performance designed to correct the errors of the world. The masterpiece was not a bomb on a school bus. It was a final, chilling threat against Alex. He was the final piece of the Zodiac's puzzle, the only one to ever understand his game, and for that, he would become the final, most glorious victim. Alex realized he had walked into a trap. The hunt wasn't over. It was about to begin, and the Zodiac had already set the stage for his final act. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. The creak of a floorboard behind him made Alex freeze. He slowly turned, the leather journal still clutched in his trembling hands. Standing in the doorway of the workshop was Elias Thorne, his face a mask of grief and exhaustion. The old cryptographer's silvery beard was matted, and his eyes, usually so sharp and full of wisdom, were now hollowed out. "He told me you would come," Elias said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "He said you were the only one smart enough to follow the trail he left behind." "Elias?" Alex's voice cracked. "What is going on? That man in the photo, is he your father?" Elias shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "My brother. My twin brother, Robert. He always saw himself as a genius, a watchmaker far superior to me. But his work was flawed, unstable. He always wanted to be seen, to be admired, but he was always one step behind." The truth hit Alex with the force of a physical blow. The Zodiac wasn't a random killer. He was a narcissist seeking validation, a man driven by a twisted need for recognition. His ciphers, his letters, his killings, they were all a desperate cry for attention from a world that had ignored him. And Elias, his own brother, had been silently observing the entire time, guiding Alex toward the truth, but never revealing the whole story. "He set this up, didn't he?" Alex said, his voice now cold and firm. "This whole place. This is his final act. A low, sinister chuckle echoed from the shadows. The man from the police sketch, Elias's brother, stepped forward. He held a small, antique pocket watch in his hand, its ticking a slow, menacing sound in the silent room. He wasn't wearing a disguise. He was just a man with a crew cut and glasses, looking at Alex with a chilling smile. "The hunt ends here, Alex," Robert said, his voice calm and precise. "You are the only one who has ever truly understood my work. The police, the newspapers, they are all fools. They never saw the beauty in my craftsmanship. But you did. And now, you will be the final piece of my greatest masterpiece." Robert pointed to a small, intricate clockwork device on the workbench. It was an elegant machine, a collection of gears and springs that hummed with a quiet energy. "This, Alex, is my final prophecy," Robert said with a proud look. "The school bus was a metaphor. This is the real thing. It's a clockwork puzzle, and when the last gear turns, it will trigger an intricate mechanism that will take your life. Just like a watchmaker takes apart a clock, I will take apart a life." Alex knew he had no time. He had to think, not as a reporter, but as a player in Robert's twisted game. He focused on the only thing that had ever truly mattered to Zodiac, his ego. "You're wrong," Alex said, his voice steady. "The masterpiece isn't this device, is it? The masterpiece is my story. The story of a watchmaker who was so desperate for recognition that he killed to be seen. You're not a genius, you're a fraud, and Elias knew it all along." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. His face contorted in a mix of fury and confusion. The ticking of the watch in his hand seemed to falter. The brief moment of hesitation was all Alex needed. He grabbed the journal and sprinted out of the workshop. As he ran, he heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Elias, seeing his brother's dark obsession, had made a choice. He had called the police. Robert's masterpiece was about to be dismantled, not by a genius, but by a simple man who wanted to do the right thing. The hunt was over, but the story was just beginning. Chapter 10. The Faded Trail. The silence of the newsroom felt different now. It was no longer a place of desperate hunts and frantic deadlines. It was a sanctuary of triumph. Alex sat at his desk, the journal of Robert Thorne and a stack of news clippings spread out before him. The headline of the Chronicle was bold and unmissable: "Zodiac Killer Unmasked." The story was the biggest of Alex's career. He wrote about the man who was driven by a narcissistic delusion, a frustrated watchmaker who turned to murder to achieve the recognition he felt he deserved. He wrote about Elias, the brother who had silently watched the horror unfold, guiding a young reporter from the shadows until he had no choice but to expose the truth. The public finally had a name, a face, and a motive for the monster who had terrorized them for years. But for Alex, the victory felt hollow. The obsession had taken its toll. He would wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, seeing the symbols and ciphers in his mind. The faces of the victims, the blank, chilling stare of Robert Thorne, it was all permanently etched into his memory. The hunt had given him a purpose, but now that it was over, he felt a void, a chilling emptiness. He visited Elias in a small, quiet hospital ward. The old cryptographer was frail, his mind drifting in and out of lucidity. He never understood, Elias whispered, his eyes distant. He just wanted the world to see his work. But some things are best left hidden, don't you think? Alex didn't answer. He knew Elias was talking about more than just his brother's dark secrets. He was talking about the truth itself. The Zodiac was in a cell, but the mystery remained. The police closed the case, but the questions lingered. Were there other victims? Other ciphers that no one had ever solved? The Zodiac was more than just a man. He was an idea, a dark, brilliant mind that had played a deadly game, and some of his pieces were still on the board, waiting. Alex looked out at the city of San Francisco, the hills shrouded in the familiar fog. He had found his truth, but the trail was faded, forever marred by the psychological cost of his pursuit. He was a hero, a celebrated journalist, but the hunt had changed him. He was a man who had walked in the shadows of a killer and had barely made it back into the light. The story was over, but the ghosts would remain. If you love this story, don't hesitate to like, share, and subscribe to support us. There will be many more exciting stories in the future. Thank you very much.